Victor Reeves sat hunched over his desk, squinting at his quantum phone app as though it were some elusive insect he could swat into submission. For the past 30 minutes, he'd been trying to get it to work, but all it did was blink irritatingly between loading and error, as if mocking his increasingly frustrated attempts. His eyes darted back and forth between the phone and his coffee machine, the latter of which seemed strangely smug in its silence, as if it were waiting for something to go wrong. It was only a few minutes ago that he'd been staring into the depths of the machine, wondering whether it would actually brew coffee today or simply blow up in his face. So far, it had delivered neither. It just hummed quietly, offering him the kind of neutral disapproval that only machines, and maybe his ex-wife, seemed capable of. "You're gonna make me late for the meeting, aren't you?" he muttered, glaring at the phone, which flashed a cryptic message that read, "Reality clarity, 98%, Victor was a future technology expert." At least, that was what his job title said. But in truth, he'd been avoiding the future part for months, living in a kind of self-imposed exile from the world of cutting-edge quantum research. He didn't want to deal with the relentless cascade of advancements that had begun to feel more like a tidal wave than a new frontier. Yesterday's news was outdated by the time it hit the press. And tomorrow? Well, tomorrow was never quite as distant as it used to be. Now, it was practically knocking at your door every day, usually with a new update or a bug fix. That was what had happened with the coffee machine. It had been a joke at first, just a little experiment where he tried to hook up the coffee machine to the quantum grid for better precision. But now? He suspected it was starting to mess with his mind. The coffee it brewed yesterday had tasted like he was drinking the pages of an old, worn-out diary. Today, it was a flavor that felt almost like nostalgia, but sharper, more defined. He couldn't quite place it. He glanced up, half expecting to see his dead mother standing in the doorway, hands on her hips, disapprovingly watching him make a mess of his life, but she wasn't there. And the app, still stuck at 98%, was mocking him for a different reason now. The message had shifted: reality clarity, error, unauthorized access detected. Unauthorized? Victor shouted at the app as if it could hear him. What the hell does that even mean? And just like that, the coffee machine sputtered to life, gurgling like it was trying to breathe. A sudden gust of wind, out of nowhere, blew a piece of paper from his desk onto the floor. The piece of paper wasn't his, but it was exactly the kind of thing he'd expected to find. A small note that read, "Dr. Reeves, you are requested to attend a briefing at Cortex. Please come immediately. Failure to comply will result in your immediate termination. Thank you." He stared at it for a few seconds, a chill creeping up his spine. Cortex. The facility where the world's most advanced quantum research was conducted. The place where history was made or unmade, depending on how you looked at it. It was also the last place he wanted to be. At least, it was the last place his tired mind wanted to think about, especially after months of pretending to be too busy with other projects to show up. But he couldn't escape it anymore. The sudden realization hit him like a punch in the gut. The universe was trying to drag him back into its chaos, kicking and screaming if need be. Victor didn't have time to feel sorry for himself. He had a meeting to attend. By the time he got to Cortex, the world outside had begun to blur into something resembling a dream. Everything was slightly off. The trees along the sidewalk flickered between real and not real, as though someone were using a dimmer switch on the entire city. Pedestrians walked by, but their faces Victor wasn't sure how seemed unfamiliar. He tried to focus on the details, the shape of a man's coat, the motion of a woman's hands as she typed on her phone. But something was wrong, like reality itself was being played in fast-forward and slow motion at the same time. By the time Victor reached the Cortex building, his head was pounding. Inside, things were worse. The walls of the facility flickered with a strange digital haze that made it look like the whole place was in the middle of a low-res VR game. He passed a security guard, who gave him a blank stare before nodding as though they'd spoken before. Had they? Victor couldn't remember. Emily Chan, his colleague, was waiting for him by the elevator. "Victor, you look like hell," she said, her voice crisp with barely concealed worry. "You've seen it, haven't you?" He raised an eyebrow. "Seen what?" "The virus," she said. "The quantum virus. It's spreading. We need to talk." Inside a dimly lit conference room, Emily laid out the situation. "It's spreading faster than we anticipated," she said, pulling up a holographic map of the world. "Every major city is being affected. People are starting to notice the changes. Some are claiming it's a glitch, others say it's a new type of attack. But we know better. This is something entirely new. The quantum virus." Victor shook his head, trying to keep his thoughts straight. "What do you mean, virus? I thought we were talking about a software bug." Emily nodded. "We thought it was a bug, but now, it's becoming clear it's much worse. It's not just affecting systems or devices. It's changing reality itself. People are forgetting their pasts. Objects are flickering in and out of existence. Memories are being altered, erased. We think it's a quantum program, an algorithm that's spreading across the world." Victor rubbed his temples, trying to process what she was saying. "Wait, are you telling me this virus is messing with the fabric of reality? Like, time itself?" "Exactly," Emily said. "It's not a typical virus. It's an algorithm that can rewrite history. It's designed to alter key moments in time and reshape the world to suit whatever future civilization is behind this. We believe that it's an effort to manipulate reality itself. If we don't stop it, the world as we know it could cease to exist." Victor's heart skipped a beat. It was a lot to absorb too much. "So, what? This thing's going around rewriting history like some sort of time traveler's diary?" "It's more complicated than that," Emily said. "The future elites, whoever they are using this virus to literally change history. They're going back and altering events, erasing people, creating a timeline that benefits them. It's not just a program, it's a weapon. And we need to figure out who's behind it before it gets worse." Victor leaned back, trying to make sense of it all. His mind raced, a whirlwind of theories and half-formed thoughts. Could it be that someone or something had cracked the code of quantum computing to the point that reality itself could be hacked? Could history be rewritten? "You're telling me that this virus can actually change the past?" Victor asked. "It's not just manipulating reality right now?" Emily nodded. "Yes. But the real question is, what happens if they succeed? If they succeed in changing the past, the present won't just be altered, it will disappear." Before Victor could respond, the lights flickered, then went out completely. For a brief, terrifying moment, the room plunged into darkness. Then, a strange hum filled the air. It wasn't the sound of a malfunctioning generator, but something deeper, more resonant. The room seemed to vibrate with a strange energy, and then, the impossible happened. The walls shifted. Victor blinked. What had been a sterile, windowless room just a second ago was now a futuristic environment, with walls made of smooth, reflective chrome. There were no doors, no furniture, and no people. Just endless, shifting surfaces, like the inside of a quantum computer. It was as if the entire building had moved or was now occupying a different version of itself. Victor stood frozen, his mind trying to process what had just happened. The walls no, the entire room had shifted into something entirely unrecognizable. He blinked, trying to adjust to the harsh, metallic sheen of the new environment, but his mind couldn't keep up. The room felt alive, the surfaces humming with an energy that made his skin crawl. It wasn't just a room, it was a living thing, a quantum organism in itself. The strange, pulsing hum filled the space, vibrating in his chest, in his bones, in the very air he breathed. His head swam. "Emily?" His voice came out hoarse, barely above a whisper. There was no answer. He turned quickly, scanning the empty space. Where was she? Where was anyone? He stepped forward, and the floor beneath him shimmered, as though it were made of liquid chrome. As his foot pressed against it, the surface rippled, making a soft, almost musical noise. A doorway materialized in front of him, glowing faintly with a bright blue light that he knew better than to approach. The sheer weirdness of the situation paralyzed him, and yet, the instinct to investigate, to understand what was happening, pulled him forward against his will. With every step, the world around him seemed to collapse and reform, folding in on itself like an accordion. Victor. The voice came from nowhere, a soft whisper that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Victor, you must understand. He spun around, heart racing. There was no one. Not a soul in sight. You must understand, Victor, the voice repeated. This time, it came from within him. It was his own voice, yet not his own. It was like a memory, one that had been buried deep and forgotten, suddenly rising to the surface, speaking to him from the core of his mind. Victor stumbled back, his head aching from the sheer strangeness of it all. A light flickered in the distance, a faint figure emerging from the darkness. The figure was blurry at first, but as it grew closer, Victor's breath caught in his throat. It was him. It was himself, not quite the version you remember, the figure said, its voice a distorted echo of his own. It was dressed in the same clothes, dark, formal attire with a thin tie, but there was something off about the way it moved, like it was too perfect. Victor took an instinctual step back, his body frozen with disbelief. What the hell is this? The figure smiled, a cold, almost mechanical smile. This is the result of a necessary correction. You've been revised. Revised? Victor repeated, his voice cracking. He took another step back, but the figure moved forward, a fluid motion that was unnervingly smooth. It's simple, really, the figure continued, its tone calm and clinical. The future has been corrected, and in doing so, your past no longer exists as you remember it. You are not who you think you are. You are not even in the timeline you think you're in. Victor's heart raced. His mind couldn't keep up with the words. His breath came faster, the edges of his vision blurring. No. No, you're lying, he stammered, shaking his head. I'm not. I'm not some experiment. I'm not part of some plan. He stopped. His body went cold. The memories, the small ones, the ones that had never quite added up, suddenly crashed into him like an avalanche. The inconsistencies he had dismissed as quirks of his mind, the weirdness with his coffee machine, the strange occurrences in his life, it was all connected. Why don't you ask yourself what you remember, Victor? The figure's voice was cold and clinical now, like a doctor diagnosing a patient. Ask yourself where you come from. What you were doing before you became part of this experiment. Victor's mind reeled. He wasn't a fool. He had been avoiding the truth for weeks, ever since the virus started spreading. He had been trying to deny the whispers, the warnings that something was wrong. That maybe, just maybe, he was the one being rewritten. His heart thundered in his chest. What do you want from me? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. The figure smiled again, but this time, it was a smile of pity. What do I want from you, Victor? I want you to understand. I want you to accept the truth of what you are. What you've always been. You are the key to this timeline's salvation. The reason everything is happening is because of you. You were designed to be part of the correction, Victor. The virus, the changes, the reality bends, they are all because of you. You are the one who will fix it all. Or destroy it. Victor could barely breathe. The weight of the words crushed him. The room began to spin, the edges of his vision blurring as he staggered backward. I don't understand. I don't understand what you're saying, he choked out. He was trying to hold on to the last threads of his reality, but they were slipping away like sand through his fingers. It's simple, the figure said, stepping forward. The future sent you back to this time, Victor. You're a part of a plan to rewrite history. You were never supposed to remember this moment. But the virus, the quantum program, it's starting to destabilize the timeline. The changes are too big now. The future is failing. You were part of an experiment to keep it all in place. Victor shook his head, but it was no use. He could feel his grip on reality slipping. Every word the figure spoke made the world around him feel more and more like a simulation. Like he was being pulled into the very heart of a machine that he was already part of. "Why?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Why me?" The figure's expression softened, though there was no warmth in it. "You were chosen because you have the unique ability to manipulate the quantum fields of reality. Your work in quantum computing, your understanding of the fabric of the universe, it's why you were recruited. Your mind was the perfect vessel for the change we needed. You were the anchor, the key to our control over time." Victor's body trembled, the truth sinking in like a stone in his stomach. He had been a part of this all along. This whole time, he had been living in someone else's narrative, someone else's experiment. His past, his career, his life, it had all been engineered by people from the future. He was a tool. A tool designed to maintain control over a universe that had long since stopped being his own. "No," he gasped. "No, I can't be. This can't be real." "It's real, Victor. You've always known it. You just didn't remember it." Victor took a step back, shaking his head violently, as though he could physically reject the words. But deep down, he knew it was true. Every strange moment, every disjointed feeling he'd had over the last few weeks, they were pieces of the puzzle he had been too scared to put together. And now, as everything around him collapsed into a cold, mathematical truth, he understood. The quantum virus, wasn't just a virus. It was a tool, a weapon created to reshape reality itself. And he, Victor Reeves, was its architect. Suddenly, the floor beneath his feet shifted again, the room warping and bending as the future collapsed into the present. The figure began to flicker, its form destabilizing like a corrupted file. "Remember, Victor," the figure said one last time, its voice fading as it distorted into static. "You are the key. The world will be saved or it will fall. Your choice." And with that, the world collapsed into darkness. The darkness was thick, suffocating, like a heavy blanket pressed over Victor's face. For a moment, he felt as if he were floating in the void, suspended between one moment and the next. He could no longer feel his body, his thoughts distant and fragmented, as though they were being pulled away from him by some unseen force. There was nothing, only the deep, unsettling hum that seemed to reverberate through the very core of his being. Then, abruptly, the hum ceased. Victor's eyes snapped open, and he gasped for air. His body jerked, as though he had been holding his breath for far too long. The space around him flickered and snapped back into focus, the harsh chrome walls and blinding lights reappearing in sharp, disorienting detail. The figure, the other version of himself, was gone. The world had shifted again, but this time, the change wasn't quite so dramatic. The once futuristic environment had stabilized, though it still felt strange, as though something was out of place. A note played out of tune. Victor staggered to his feet, his legs weak beneath him, his mind a whirlwind of confusion. He reached out, his hand brushing against the smooth surface of the wall. It felt cold to the touch, but at the same time, it buzzed with some sort of low, invisible energy. The room was completely empty now, save for him and the strange hum that lingered like an aftertaste. There was no sign of Emily. "Emily," he called out, his voice shaking. "Emily, where are you?" The silence was his only reply. The hum continued, but it was now accompanied by a faint flickering sound, like static on a dying television. Victor felt a knot of panic twist in his chest. He had no idea where he was. No idea how he had gotten here. Everything had collapsed into chaos, the room, his mind, his very reality. Nothing made sense anymore. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to clear the fog that seemed to cloud his thoughts, and then, as if in answer to his confusion, a voice spoke. "Victor." It wasn't Emily's voice, though it was close enough to stop his heart. It was a woman's voice, warm, but with an edge of something metallic, something mechanical. He spun around, his eyes wide, his breath caught in his throat. A figure stood in the doorway. Not Emily. Not the other version of himself. This woman was something entirely different, tall, composed, her eyes a piercing shade of silver. She was dressed in a sleek, dark suit that shimmered with a light of its own, almost as if the fabric itself was alive. Her presence seemed to distort the space around her, bending it just enough to make the room feel like it was warping again. Victor took a step back, his heart hammering in his chest. Who are you? The woman didn't move, but her eyes never left his, watching him with a calm, unwavering intensity. I am the one who made you, she said, her voice soft yet undeniably authoritative. I am the reason you are here, Victor. And the reason you are stuck. Victor's throat tightened. He swallowed hard, trying to make sense of her words. You made me? What does that even mean? The woman stepped into the room, her every movement calculated, precise. The quantum virus, Victor. It didn't just create glitches in reality. It created you. I designed you, engineered you, because we needed someone with your ability to manipulate time. You're not just an expert in quantum computing, you're the program that ensures everything stays in place. You were chosen, Victor. Victor recoiled. Chosen? You're telling me I was programmed? The woman smiled, a cold, almost imperceptible curve of her lips. Yes. You were programmed to be the anchor, the stabilizer of this timeline. A version of yourself was sent back to rewrite history, our history. To fix the mistakes we made. To ensure our survival. Victor staggered back again, his mind reeling. His past life, his memories, everything he thought he knew about himself, about the world was slipping away, pulled apart by the strings of this woman's cold, calculated words. You're lying, he spat. I'm not your puppet. I'm not some experiment. The woman's expression remained unchanged. The truth doesn't lie, Victor. It is the truth. You were made to be part of this. Every step you've taken, every action you've performed, has been part of the grand design. Our design. Victor's vision swam with dizziness, his thoughts splintering. The implications of her words crashed over him, each one worse than the last. He had been engineered. His life was nothing but a thread in a vast, incomprehensible tapestry, woven by people, by someone in the future. He wasn't a person. He wasn't even a being of his own. He was a program. Why me? He choked out, his voice cracking under the weight of everything he was learning. Why did you choose me? Because you were perfect, the woman answered, her voice still flat. You had the right combination of intellect, ambition, and curiosity. The virus needed a mind like yours, one capable of understanding the quantum fields, the forces that bind time and reality together. And once we had you in place, we made sure you would never question your role. Until now. Victor's mind spun. Until now? Yes. The woman's tone shifted, a hint of coldness creeping into her voice. The virus was designed to keep you in line. To make sure you did what we needed you to do. But the timelines have begun to destabilize. You've started to question everything, to remember things you weren't supposed to. The quantum virus was designed to be a perfect control, but it's beginning to fail. That's why we need you now to fix it. To complete the process and reset the world to its proper course. Victor shook his head violently, trying to clear the fog in his mind. I won't do it. I won't be part of your sick plan. I won't. The woman held up a hand, silencing him with a single gesture. You will. You have no choice. The timeline is already slipping away. You can either fix it, our future, our civilization, or let it unravel entirely. Victor felt a chill wash over him. The weight of her words pressed down on him, heavier than anything he had ever felt before. He knew that the future she spoke of was already being shaped by the virus. A future where history was constantly rewritten, where the past was mutable, and where people like him were nothing but cogs in the machinery of a new world order. And somewhere in that vast machine, he had been the perfect tool for their plan. He was no hero. He was just a part of the experiment, but could he undo it? Could he break free? You think you have a choice, Victor, the woman said, her voice cutting through his spiraling thoughts. But you don't. It's already too late for you to walk away. You've been infected. The virus is inside you. And once you realize the truth, once you accept your role, you'll see that it's the only way forward. No, Victor whispered, shaking his head, his hands clenched into fists. I won't let you control me. I won't. The woman's smile never wavered. You will. It's already begun. Suddenly, a deep, pulsing noise echoed through the room, louder this time, a deep vibration that shook the very walls. It was the sound of something large, something massive beginning to shift. Victor looked around, his heart racing. The room was flickering again, warping, twisting like it had before. His vision blurred. The walls stretched, elongated, bending in impossible directions. He could feel it now, the virus, the programming, it was inside him. He had become part of it. The woman stepped forward, her eyes gleaming with a strange certainty. It's over now. You don't need to fight it anymore. Victor's breath caught in his throat as the room collapsed once more into the darkness. This time, it felt like the entire world had fallen away. End of story.